A few months ago, I asked for viewer submitted topics that I could talk about in a week when I hadn't got anything else to talk about, or that in some way connected to my writing from that week. And I got one question asking me if there is a particular time of day that I feel inspired to write. And this has linked into something that happened earlier this week, in which I had a bit of a creative frenzy. A few weeks ago, I posted about how I was trying to figure out the family tree for the royal family of my fictional country and how it was a very complicated research process, but I managed to crack it and I managed to work it out. So I know about all the reigns of the previous kings and queens, and I know all about who they married and when they were born and when they died. And the thing that's been the biggest help is that it's sort of given me a template now that I can fill in. What happened was I realized I had finished it, and I there's this moment in Avengers Endgame. This might be a weird comparison, but there's a moment in Avengers Endgame where Tony Stark has been trying to he's been trying to crack time travel using the quantum realm, and there's this one moment, one night, where he's got this sort of 3D hologrammatic thing visualizing what he's trying to work out, and he's trying to get the math right and the equation correct, and then it keeps sort of visualizing it for him, and every time it says fail or whatever, until eventually he tries something, and um, I forget what the word is, but it's a sort of donut. There's a sort of scientific sort of donut shape. I forget the word for it, but it creates one of those, and it says success. And Tony's reaction, and I think this is actually one of the most believable moments emotionally in a Marvel film. If you can, and you can take that comment for as much as you think it's worth. But the way Robert Downey Jr. plays it is he just sort of sits there for a moment, looks at it, realizes that it works and that he's actually managed to invent time travel, and he just sits there and he goes, shit! And he realizes that he's got it and that it's all come together. And that's kind of how I felt with this family tree that I've managed to figure out, because it told me practically everything I needed to know, both in terms of the extended history of the country, but also in recent history, recent family history, and things like that. Like, okay, who is still alive, who's died, how long for, etc. And it's answered a lot of the questions that I knew I needed to have the answer to in order to write this properly, but I didn't have the answer to. So that was sort of a research process in itself. I wasn't just researching this family tree, I was also using that to research this world. And because of that, I now actually know what's going on here. You know, it's this has gone to a lot of drafts, and initially I didn't even know what was happening in the present or what world this really was. And through subsequent drafts, I've been sort of cracking that and sort of peeling the layers off and getting it to something that I understand that's happening in the present now, the geography of it all, how everything works, who everyone is, etc. But it was the past that was still a mystery, even though the past informs the present of what's happening. And I knew until I get that, the story can't really go ahead. Now that I have that I have that past figured out, and I actually know what's been happening over the past several centuries and what's happened over the past few decades and how we get to where we are, now I finally got the lore. And the way I'm thinking about it is it's kind of like fan fiction. I'm kind of writing fan fiction about a fictional universe. That's how I'm thinking about it, which is a weird thing to say, but it's kind of like how when there's a certain fictional universe, like, I don't know, Star Wars, for instance, where you understand absolutely everything. You know the continuity, you know the details, you know what's accurate to certain eras compared with other eras, and you know how to make the story you want to write fit in as something that could theoretically have actually happened without breaking canon. That's what I'm doing now. I'm sort of I find it helps me to not think of it as my story, but to think of it as more like fan fiction I'm writing about someone else's world, but that I as a fan know in full detail. Because that takes a lot of pressure off me, and it also sort of, I find it helps, because then it's like, it's not real, so there's not, I'm not as worried about certain things, and I can just enjoy the process more. That's how I'm thinking about it. Which brings me on to the question of when I feel most inspired to write. It really depends by what it is I'm writing. If I'm writing the actual book, the actual prose text, that's going to be different from when I'm doing other kinds of writing. Like, I think it was, when was it? Was it Monday night? So that we're going into Tuesday, I think, maybe, where I had all of this knowledge in my head, and I thought, okay, now I see it. Now I know exactly how this should be. Now I can actually picture the story in my head properly, so that I'm not having to just sort of go on guesswork, and I know exactly how this will happen. And I just couldn't leave it alone. And so it was sort of really late into the night. I mean, I'm willing to stay up until like 3 if I really have those ideas, because the thing is, that's the time of night when my brain is just firing off alpha waves. I think they're called alpha waves. I think that's the kind of waves they are. But they're the same waves that are unlocked by having a shower. It's like after you've had a shower, you suddenly start to feel sort of very enhanced. Like I can sort of imagine myself giving speeches very well after I've had a shower compared with before. And it's also the same waves that are unlocked when you're just going to sleep, because that's when your brain is at its most active, because its sort of subconscious has been unleashed. And so that's when I get that, and I tend to go into a sort of dreamlike state. And what happened was, but when I was doing all of this, I knew I just need to get all of this out of me, because if I sleep on it, I'm gonna forget, and I can't just rely on myself remembering this stuff. And so what I did was I just basically splurged it all onto the screen, where some of what I was writing was actual prose extracts, like, oh, that's a really good sentence for this scene. That's a really good sort of way of describing it, or that's actually a really good exchange of dialogue there. For instance, and I'm not going to try and give away too many things here, but there's a scene where there's a party in the first chapter, and the main character, who is the prince of this country, is talking to one of the guests, and he's asking him what he does, and it turns out this guest has been invited because he's an influencer. And I thought, oh, of course, yes, that makes sense. Because I was thinking, why is he here? Why I need these two characters to sort of meet each other at this thing, but why exactly would he be invited? And I thought, okay, he first of all, he should have a strong following on the internet. Okay, sure. Then I thought, actually, why don't I just say he's an influencer? Because then that's like, yeah, they invite people who have large enough social media followings and then show them a good time, so that then that person will just post about it positively and they'll get some free propaganda. And I thought to myself, as I thought that would be a very interesting sentence for the main character to actually say aloud. Oh yeah, we find people who have large enough social media followings so that we can invite them and then show them a good time, and then they'll give us some free propaganda. I thought, that's a really just interesting, cynical thing that he would say. I had thought that myself to explain why he's there in the scene, and then I thought, actually, you know what? The way I phrase that to myself in my mind is actually a really good line of dialogue for the other character to say. So I wrote that line, and I put quote marks on it so I know that it's a line of dialogue and that kind of thing. And then that led me to think of what his response would be. And then during the scene where they first meet each other, I knew how I wanted it to go, so I wrote down, this is how the scene goes. And are there any details? Are there any like subtleties, like small things that really bring the scene to life? And so I wrote those down, like certain expressions or like props in the scene, like wine glasses and things, that sort of thing. What are they both feeling during this scene that I need to get across? So I'll just write all of that to remind myself, like it's an instruction manual, and I'll do it all in bullet points, and then I'll structure it in chronological order so that I know exactly how the scene should go in order when I'm writing it. And then there's some things in there that are less specific because I haven't really got around to them yet. For instance, if he's an influencer, what kind of content does he post? Like, is he a streamer? He could be a streamer, but why would you invite a streamer necessarily? Or does it matter? The fact that he has enough followers, do they care about the content he posts so long as it's not something politically objectionable? Or is he a political activist? And that it would be interesting to see, is he posting things that aren't necessarily the sort of thing they would want him to post? Like maybe he's campaigning for the abolition of the monarchy or a transition to a democratic republic or something. I don't know. I haven't figured that out. So what I did was I wrote as a question, what kind of content does he post? If I can figure that out, then I can figure out like who this person is. And so that's not exactly how I phrased it in the document, but I wrote it like that, words to that effect. And I wrote it in italics so that I know in my own shorthand, oh, it's in italics, so this isn't a part of the scene. This is a question I've left for myself to think about and to answer later on, that kind of thing. So that's the kind of thing that I tend to write in the early hours of the day when I don't really want to be actually thinking properly about the book in terms of writing the actual text prose of it, because that would feel kind of tiring at that time of day. So instead I just sort of let my ideas out, and I'll usually do that while I listen to music from things that are either similar in style to the emotional effect I want to go for, or will be from things that have inspired what I'm writing or are similar to it in some way. There's a lot of tracks from Yuri on Ice, things like Dean Fujioka, W. Hatano, I think that's how it's pronounced, like Theme of King JJ, that kind of thing. But also there'll be some stuff from The Prisoner, like the scene where Number 6 is throned. I like that music a lot. That ties in more with the third act. The 1812 Overture, mainly because of the way it's used in V for Vendetta, and also the two tracks from the end credits, Street Fighting Man by Rolling Stones, and also BKAB remix. There'll be some stuff in there from musicals that create the kind of sensation that I want to go for, things like Starlight Express, mainly the Starlight sequence, and things from like Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, mainly Any Dream Will Do, that kind of thing. Just because then it gets me into the right headspace, and also my character has his own theme. Like I like to imagine if my character's life were a TV show, what the theme music would be. And for mine, it used to be Harmony Hall by Vampire Weekend. And actually, there's a really interesting story behind that, but I don't have time for that now. And now it's Fernando by ABBA, but the version of Fernando from Gracias por la Música, which is a Spanish album they released. They released an album of songs, of their own songs in Spanish. One of them is Fernando. Because my main character's name is Fernando. And I just listened to that song, and it's like, I feel like Jim Carrey in that one scene in Bruce Almighty. It's just, it's like that. That is my equivalent of coffee, because I don't like coffee really, but that for me is like my brain coffee, and then I just right away. And also, there's one scene I thought of, which might not make it in, but there's this one scene I thought of where someone dances to Rasputin, because there's one character in there who is sort of inspired by Rasputin, but then I discovered there is in fact a Spanish version of Rasputin. And I listened to the Spanish version of Rasputin, and I imagined this person dancing, and I imagined that scene. And oh boy, I thought, man, if I decide to cut this, I'm going to have to come up with a good fucking reason for it. Because this could be one of the best scenes in the book, which probably means it's going to be one of the worst if I think it's one of the best, because that's how it works, you know. But yeah, I'm just trying to remember who it was. It was Fangoria. Yeah, you like D&D, Fangoria. Yeah. Okay. So I think that's all I have to say about that. But then when I'm actually writing the book properly and I'm actually working on a chapter, that I prefer to do in the daytime. I like to get up and I like to give myself plenty of time, since I have nothing else to do, and I'll just sort of give myself the day. I prefer to write I'll start mid-afternoon at the earliest, because I can only go for so long. I have had days where I've really tried to push how far I can go in terms of like the writing session and how long it lasts. But generally speaking, I can only go for like a few hours every day. 3 o'clock is like pushing it in terms of how early I'll start. Usually 4, which actually means I'll sit down at my laptop at 4 o'clock. But I probably won't start writing until like 4:30. And when I say start writing at 4:30, I mean I'll begin at 4:30. It won't be until like 5 that I actually start writing properly. Around 6, I'm thinking I've written for an hour. I ought to keep going, probably. But I start to feel hungry at that time. But I'll usually push through till 7. When it gets to 7, I'll think, yeah, okay, I think I've done a good amount of writing that if I wanted to stop, I could, without hating myself and going to bed feeling depressed and worthless like I always do. But I think, well, I'm going to be having dinner soon. There's no point starting something now. So I may as well continue writing. But I've been writing for long enough that I can justify sort of taking it easy. So I might slow down a bit. That sort of thing. But the thing is, once I really get into the flow, I find it difficult to get out of the flow. And I really like being in that space. Which is why I tend to think if I stop, I'm going to find it difficult to get going again. So I ought to keep going, really. And then I'll look at my word count and I'll think, okay, is this good or bad? Like, if it's 500 words, all I have to write is like the same amount of words I've written so far, and then I'll be able to not harshly judge myself. Whereas if it's already at 1,000, I'll think, okay, yeah, if I've managed to write this many words, maybe I'll be able to write that same amount again before the end of the day. Because after dinner, I don't really feel like doing anything, you know. There's only a few hours left of the day. After dinner, I probably prefer to play a video game or something. And if I want to do that without just feeling guilty about not writing, I ought to just write more while there's still time left. Because then the more I write, the less likely I am to just hate myself for then knocking off for the evening by playing one of my games. So if I do that, if I just sort of keep writing until dinner, then I can knock off and play a video game for the evening without feeling bad about it. So I ought to keep writing even if it's slowly, and that tends to be how it is for me. Because like after sunset and it gets dark, I don't really feel like working, if you can call it working, which I don't really. And like at this time of day, I want to like take advantage of the low light, you know. I want to like turn on my PC and like watch YouTube or play a game, you know, or just do some more cataloging work for my game collection, which is something I'm still working on, or just play a game, or just like catch up on my friends' blog posts, or like just play a game, for instance, or maybe just read about the latest movie news, or just play a game, or something, or like I don't know, I could put a Blu-ray on, or I could just like play a game or something, or I could there's lots of options that I've got. I could like I could do some more like outlining work because that doesn't take much, or I could play a game, I suppose, that kind of thing. Um, so that's tend to be what my day involves. Uh, I hope that answered your question, and I'm gonna try and keep this going because I think it's going fairly well. Also, I know when the book is going to be published. I haven't got a publisher. I've just decided for myself when I want it to be published, and that means I need to be getting on with it.